Hello chess friends! This is your super quick guide to surviving the London system with the black pieces. As we all know, this system can be very annoying to play against if you don't know what you're doing, and if you don't have a game plan you can suffer some pretty horrible defeats like I did in the past, which is what prompted me to look into this and find what I believe are the best moves for black against the most common lines you'll see from white. So first let's look at this most common c3 move here. I like knight h5. Not a lot of humans play this move. I don't know why. The engine loves it. And we're just going to take out that bishop one way or another. Let's look at d takes c5 if white tries to grab the pawn. Now, I like this knight h5 move when knight b to d2 has not been played. Okay, so if that move had been played instead of c3, I wouldn't have played this move. But since there's no knight here, now, after we take the bishop and we go e6, looking to grab this pawn, there's no knight b3 to defend. So that's key. So maybe white will try to hang on to the pawn with like b4, but then we'll do the standard a5 idea, and then bishop b5, pinning the knight, but takes, and now the engine found a really nice move here that I think will probably catch your opponent by surprise. If you get to this position, g5. Okay, so that's crazy. What does that do? Well, we're attacking a pawn, and there's another threat, dual threats, of taking on f4 and also getting the bishop to here. And how are you saving that rook? Okay, so let's look at white's options now. If you take the pawn, then obviously bishop g7. You move the knight. Here, the computer says don't even take the rook. It says play e5 or go h6 looking to activate this rook. And black has a bit of an edge, a bit of an advantage. Okay, we should probably mention queen d4 instead. Hitting the rook, that's fine. We'll just move the rook and then look to play bishop g7 next. If like knight e5 is played, no problem. Bishop g7 pins the knight. Black is quite a bit better there. So maybe the best plan for white is to play this knight c3. We'll go bishop g7. You know, the knight's pinned and it's attacked, so rook c1 can defend. Rook a3, increasing the pressure. Queen d2. And then at some point we'll take on f4 and restore the material equality. And black has a fine game. Okay, so that is the d takes c5 line. What happens if the bishop moves? I think most common here would be bishop g3, because most players after knight takes g3, h takes g3, they like opening the file for the rook. But we don't really have to worry about this. We'll play e6, and you know, after like queen c2, h6, because this pawn needed to be defended, and we can just kind of develop normally with bishop d7. And maybe keep the king in the middle. I don't know, maybe castle queenside. I mean, white can no longer castle kingside here. I mean, you can, but then you're giving up a file for your rook, and you can see white's not going to have much of an advantage, if anything. So, okay, after we take in the center and bishop d6, white even has some problems castling queenside, because like if you do it here, we got knight b4, and if the knight is taken, then we got rook to c8. So, you know, now the queen's in trouble. So, yeah, this appears to be all just very, very fine for black. Now, what else do we have to look at here? There's also bishop e5. Here we'll go f6. So, the only difference is, after this f6 pawn has been moved, which isn't too bad. In some lines, the computer says you can tuck your king away on f7, and it's fine. So, that is the line after c3. Those are the variations you're most likely to get into. Now, let's look at the knight b to d2 line. This is actually the most popular move for white among the higher rated players, and here I like to play queen to b6, not to defend c5. The plan is actually queen takes b2 after d takes c5. Here, if you take on c5, in a lot of these lines, white gets an advantage by eventually playing c4 and just kind of breaking things open. Queen takes b2 is what you want to play, and normally you'll see rook to b1, and the queen gets herself in a situation where she can easily be trapped, but everything should be fine if you play the right moves. This is kind of the unfortunate reality of playing the strongest moves against the London. You have to know some theory, and you have to be careful that your queen doesn't get trapped. You don't want to take on a2 here, because this is the line the computer gives, and the queen's going to get kicked around with this move, rook to a1 eventually, get kicked to the b4 square, and then rook a4, and I guess After correct play by both sides, white gets an advantage by piling up on this A pawn. That's what the engine came up with anyway. But just remember, don't take on A2. Put your queen on C3, like that. And we're blockading this pawn. Now, bishop B5 is what you'll typically see. And we're going to go E6, just getting ready to develop. And then after castle, we want to play bishop E7. Now, if you see bishop to E5 here, taking advantage of the fact this knight is pinned, then we take on C5. So you take on C5 if you have to. If the queen gets kicked, you can take on C5, but you don't want to take on C5 unless white forces you to. That's kind of the rule of thumb in this line, okay? So here C4 can be played, and apparently black can kind of hang on. You got some squares for the queen. Okay, so you won't typically see that line. Typically you'll see castles. Now here, you want to play bishop E7. Now you don't take C5 with the bishop either, because this apparently is not good. The line the computer gives is this bishop E5, kicking the queen around. Okay, and that's supposed to be good for white. And then of course if you took on C5 with the queen, you'd see C4 again. White has an advantage. So just don't take that C5 pawn. Just develop and be responsible. Okay? Now, knight D4 or knight to E5 is nothing to worry about. We'll just break the pin with bishop D7, and black should be okay. The move you really have to be careful of is this E4 move. Okay? And do not take the pawn on E4. Just don't do it, because you're going to see knight C4, because you took protection off C4 by doing that. And then the knight drops in here, and taking here, that's no good because you got rook B3. And I think the queen is now trapped. So this is an example of where the queen gets trapped. If you see that, you just castle. Okay? And now E5, that's a very common, I think that's probably what you're likely to see. Knight to D7. Knight B3. Now you got to be careful because there's this threat of bishop D2. So we're going to go queen B4. For example, you try taking this pawn, takes, bishop D2. Queen's getting trapped. So you need to go to B4. You need to get ready to get out of there. This move here, if you see that, you might be tempted to grab this pawn. Don't do it, because there's C3. Now if the queen goes here, bishop C1, I believe that traps the queen. Queen takes C3, bishop D2. So you're not taking pawns. You want to take pieces, get pieces off the board. Knight takes, then here you can finally take on C5. Maybe there's another move? Nope, the engine says now you need to take on C5. So if you can remember that, after you get a couple of knights traded, then take on C5 finally. And you should be okay here. The queen's not getting trapped.
Now there's a line I forgot to mention that I should probably talk about here. It's where white plays this bishop F4 move and he waits on knight F3. So this changes a few things. We'll still go C5, and white may solidify with this move C3. I think that's the most common. Now you have a couple of options here. Queen B6 is a strong move, also knight C6. I'll look at this variation first. Now, as long as there's no knight on F3, our knight H5 move is out, because the queen will just take it. So if knight F3 is played here, now you can go knight H5. This is fine. You probably won't see that, though. You'll probably see knight D2 instead. If D takes C5, now we have E5. We can play this because there's no knight on F3, and this pawn has plenty of protection here by the knight. So that's one good thing about not having that knight on F3. But knight D2 is probably what you'll see. And now bishop F5 is what you want to play here. And white will most likely attack our pawn that we've just left undefended with queen B3. And now here, a good move is queen to C8. A lot of players will play queen D7, but I like queen C8 because it does a couple of things. First of all, you have the option of dropping this bishop back to D7 if you want to. If, for example, knight F3 and knight to H4 is played. Also, the knight will never land on E5 with an attack on our queen, like it would if we were on D7. So I think that's why a lot of players like to put the queen on C8. Now maybe knight to F3. And here we're going to go C4, queen D1, and immediately strengthen our structure here, because we've overextended our pawns a little bit here, so we want to strengthen things with B5. And then, you know, stuff like this. And we can play E6 at some point, and our bishop is outside the pawn structure. It's pretty good. We just don't want to have to play E6 and trap our bishop on a bad diagonal. That's kind of the goal when we're playing against the London. Now let's look at this queen b6 line. This is another option if you want to go this route. Again, queen b3 will probably be played. You don't ever want to take the queen and let white open the file for his rook. That's known to be not a good thing to do. So here again we'll go c4. Queen c2. Now this bishop, where's it going? g6 is what we want to play here so we can get to f5. I don't think white has a good way to stop that bishop f5 move. So knight d2, bishop f5, the queen will go to c1, keeping defense on b2, bishop g7, and a lot of times you'll see h3 and like trying to expand with g4 and cause us some inconvenience here. g4, maybe we drop into d3. That's a move, which gets kind of crazy because bishop takes, pawn takes, and this line is probably worth a lot more study. And there's probably a lot more variations that need to be looked at than what I have time to go over here. So I'll leave that to you if you like this line. I think that this knight c6 line might be a little simpler. So anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you find this helpful. Good luck facing the London.